Welcome back to Her True Stories. Before we dive into the final chapter of Sandra's incredible transformation, I want to share something powerful with you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Now, we're about to see how Sandra's journey comes full circle 10 years later. The woman who started as a dismissed mother is about to show us what true victory looks like. Hit that like button if you're ready to see the ultimate transformation, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this ending is going to leave you speechless. Let's see how legends are born. My name is Sandra Gray, and I'm 58 years old. People often tell me I look like I stepped out of a magazine. Silver hair that catches the light just right, blue eyes that have seen too much, and a smile that can either warm your heart or freeze your blood, depending on how you've treated me. I was sipping my morning coffee in my glass-walled kitchen, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly before me, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my son's name, Marcus. I hadn't heard from him in 3 months. "Good morning, sweetheart," I answered, genuinely happy to hear from him. "Hey, Mom." His voice was casual, almost bored. "So, Jessica and I got married last week." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "You what?" "Yeah, we did the whole thing in Vegas. Super small, just us and a couple witnesses. You know how Jessica hates big crowds." Jessica, his girlfriend of 2 years who had made it crystal clear she thought I was an overbearing mother-in-law before I was even officially a mother-in-law. Jessica, who rolled her eyes every time I spoke and made snide comments about my outdated taste in everything from furniture to fashion. "Marcus," I said slowly, trying to process this information. "You got married last week, and you didn't tell me?" "Come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. You know how these things go." It was spontaneous, very romantic. Besides, big weddings are just expensive parties, right? Expensive parties. I thought about the wedding I dreamed of hosting for my only son. The reception in my garden, overlooking the ocean. The celebration I'd been planning in my head since he was born. "I see," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "Well, congratulations." "Thanks. And hey, that's actually why I'm calling. We want to spend our honeymoon at your beach house in Malibu. Can you just send us the keys? We're planning to head down there this afternoon." My beach house. The one my late husband and I had bought as our dream retirement home. The one where we'd planned to grow old together before cancer took him 5 years ago. The house that now held all my most precious memories. "You want a honeymoon in my house?" "Yeah, it'll be perfect. Jessica's always wanted to stay there, and it's way better than some hotel. Plus, it's free, right? Win-win." Jessica had always wanted to stay there. The same Jessica who had never shown me an ounce of respect or gratitude for anything I'd done for them. "Just send the keys?" I repeated. "Yeah, you can FedEx them or whatever. We'll take good care of the place, don't worry." "I'm sure you will." "Great. You're the best, Mom. I'll call you when we get back to town." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. My son had gotten married without inviting me, without even telling me it was happening. And now he wanted to use my most sacred space for his honeymoon with a woman who treated me like furniture. I set down my coffee and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below with a rhythmic violence that matched the beating of my heart. For 28 years, I had given Marcus everything. Every opportunity, every advantage, every benefit of every doubt. When his father died, I had protected him from financial worry by managing the inheritance myself. When he struggled to find his career path, I had supported him through 3 different degree programs. When he moved in with Jessica, I had welcomed her with open arms despite her obvious disdain for me. And this was how he repaid me, with exclusion, dismissal, and the casual assumption that I would simply hand over whatever he wanted. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. My estate attorney, Patricia Whitman. Patricia? It's Sandra Gray. I need to make some changes to my will. Today, if possible. Of course, Sandra. Is everything all right? I looked out at the ocean again, watching a seagull dive for fish in the churning water. Everything's about to be perfect. Oh, you can already feel the storm brewing, can't you? Sandra's about to show her ungrateful son exactly what happens when you take your mother for granted. But before we see what she does next, I need to share something important with you. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, hit that like button. You're not alone. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Now, let's see what Sandra has planned for that wedding gift, because trust me, you won't see this coming. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. This story is about to get very interesting. I spent the rest of that morning in my study, surrounded by legal documents and making phone calls that would change everything. Patricia arrived at noon with the revised will, and I signed it with a flourish that felt like justice. But that was just the beginning. I called my private investigator next. Yes, I have one. When you're a wealthy widow, you learn to be careful about people's motivations. David Hawthorne had helped me with several delicate matters over the years. David, I need you to compile a complete financial profile on someone. And I need it by tomorrow morning. Of course, Mrs. Gray. Who's the subject? Jessica Martinez. She's 26, currently married to my son. I want to know everything: her debts, her spending habits, her employment history, any financial irregularities. Understood. May I ask the nature of your interest? Let's call it due diligence. That afternoon, I drove to my safety deposit box at the bank. Inside, among my important papers and jewelry, was a manila folder I'd hoped I'd never need to open. It contained information about Jessica that I discovered 6 months ago but had chosen to keep to myself, hoping my son would eventually see through her facade on his own. I should have known better. Love makes fools of even the smartest men. The file contained copies of Jessica's credit reports showing debts she'd never mentioned to Marcus. Photos of her with another man, taken just 3 months ago when she'd told Marcus she was visiting her sick aunt in Phoenix. Email printouts showing her conversations with friends about Marcus being her ticket to the good life. I'd been saving this information, hoping I'd never need to use it. But desperate times call for desperate measures. That evening, I began shopping. Not for clothes or jewelry, but for something much more valuable: information and services. I hired a forensic accountant to trace every dollar Marcus had spent in the last 2 years. I hired a second private investigator to monitor Jessica's activities. I contacted my lawyer again to discuss some very specific legal strategies. And then I began crafting the perfect wedding gift. It wasn't going to be champagne or chocolates or anything that would cause physical harm. No, my gift was going to be something much more devastating: the truth. But the truth, delivered properly, can be more destructive than any weapon. I started with the wedding registry. Oh yes, I found it. Jessica had created one at 3 different high-end stores, apparently hoping to cash in on a wedding that hadn't even been announced. The total value of items on her registries exceeded $50,000. I purchased every single item on every single registry, but not to give to them. I had everything delivered to various women's shelters and charity organizations across the city, each delivery accompanied by a card that read, "In honor of Marcus and Jessica's wedding, donated by someone who believes love should be genuine. Then I called each store and requested that confirmation emails be sent to both Marcus and Jessica, thanking them for their generous donations to charity. Next, I arranged for a very special delivery to my beach house. Not a gift, exactly, but a surprise that would arrive exactly 24 hours after they did. I spent the rest of the evening making phone calls to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Former colleagues of my late husband, business associates, society friends, all people who knew Marcus, who had watched him grow up, who had attended his father's funeral, and offered their support to our family. Each conversation was carefully crafted. I'm calling to share some wonderful news. Marcus got married last week. Yes, it was very sudden. In Vegas, apparently. No, we weren't invited. It was very intimate, you understand. Just the two of them. They wanted to keep it private from family. Yes, I'm disappointed, but you know how young people are these days. Independence is so important to them. By the time I finished those calls, news of Marcus's secret wedding and his deliberate exclusion of his mother would be circulating through every social circle that mattered in our city. The next morning, David called with Jessica's financial profile. Mrs. Gray, you're going to find this very interesting. Ms. Martinez has been living beyond her means for years. Credit card debt totaling over $80,000, most of it accrued in the last 18 months. She's been making minimum payments by taking cash advances from other cards. What about employment? She claims to be a social media influencer, but her actual income appears to be negligible. Maybe a few $100s a month from sponsored posts. Certainly nowhere near enough to support her lifestyle. And her recent activities? That's where it gets interesting. She's been meeting regularly with a man named Brandon Phillips. Hotel meetings, expensive dinners, gifts. This relationship appears to have been ongoing even after she moved in with your son. I closed my eyes and felt something cold settle in my chest. My poor, trusting son. David, I need you to prepare a comprehensive dossier. Photos, credit reports, everything. And I need it delivered to a specific address tomorrow evening. Certainly. What's the address? I gave him the address of my beach house. And David, make sure it's delivered when they're both present. I want them to answer the door together. The final piece of my plan required one more phone call. To my son's best friend, James, who worked as a journalist for the Los Angeles Times Society page. James, darling, I have a story for you. A real rags to riches tale with a modern twist. Have you ever heard of a young woman who goes by the name Jessica Martinez online, but whose real name is Jessica Valdez? I could hear the interest in his voice immediately. James had always been ambitious. I can't say that I have. She's quite the entrepreneur. Built her entire lifestyle by creating fictional narratives about her background and using those stories to manipulate wealthy men into supporting her. She's currently married to Marcus, of course. They had a lovely private ceremony last week. This sounds like it could be quite a story. I thought you might think so. I'll send you some documentation that might interest you. Of course, any article would need to be completely factual. We wouldn't want to publish anything that couldn't be verified. Of course not. Excellent. I'll email you the files this afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation. Marcus wanted to spend his honeymoon in my house with his secret wife. And I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. But sometimes, getting what you ask for is the last thing you actually want. I spent the next day in careful preparation. Every detail had to be perfect, every timing precisely calculated. Revenge, I had learned, is like conducting an orchestra. Every instrument must come in at exactly the right moment to create the perfect symphony. First, I called the property management company that maintained my beach house. This is Sandra Gray. I need you to prepare the Malibu property for guests arriving this afternoon. Full service preparation. Of course, Mrs. Gray. How many guests?
2.
My son and his new wife. They'll be staying for a week. Wonderful. Should we stock the bar and prepare the usual welcome amenities? Actually, I have something very specific in mind. I arranged for the house to be stocked with the finest champagne, the most expensive chocolates, fresh flowers, and every luxury two newlyweds could want. I wanted them to feel completely welcome, completely comfortable, completely secure in the belief that they had gotten away with their deception. Because the higher you fly, the farther you fall. Next, I visited my bank and made a very interesting transaction. I transferred $500,000 from my primary account into a new account, one that Marcus could access. Then I called him. Marcus, darling, I have wonderful news. Hey, Mom. We're actually about to leave for the beach house. Did you send the keys? Of course I did, sweetheart. But I called about something else. I've been thinking about your new marriage, and I realized I've been terribly selfish. Selfish? What do you mean? I've been holding on to your father's life insurance money for years, telling myself I was protecting it for you. But you're a married man now. You should have access to your inheritance. There was a pause. My inheritance? $500,000, Marcus. It's yours. I've just transferred it into an account with your name on it. I could hear Jessica in the background, asking what was happening. Marcus covered the phone, but I could make out her excited squealing when he told her. Mom, that's wow. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll have a wonderful honeymoon. Say you'll think of me when you're enjoying that beautiful ocean view. Of course I will. Mom, you're amazing. I love you too, sweetheart. Enjoy your week. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. The money was real and it was legally his. But what Marcus didn't know was that there were conditions attached to that account, conditions that would become very important very soon. That afternoon, I drove past the beach house to see if they'd arrived. Marcus's car was in the driveway, and I could see them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, embracing on the deck overlooking the ocean. They looked so happy, so perfectly content with their deception. I parked where they couldn't see me and watched for a few minutes. Jessica was wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Marcus was feeding her strawberries and champagne. They were laughing, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Package ready for delivery tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. All documentation included as requested. Perfect timing. I typed back. Make sure they're both home. This delivery requires both signatures. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my main house. Just a few close friends, the kind of people who matter in our social circle. The kind who attend charity galas and sit on hospital boards and whose opinions shape reputations. I'm so excited about Marcus's wedding, I told them over the appetizer course. It was such a romantic story. They eloped to Vegas without telling anyone, even me. Jessica was apparently so shy about meeting the family that she preferred to keep it just between the two of them. My friend Margaret raised an eyebrow. She didn't want to meet the family? You know how some people are about social situations. I'm sure she'll warm up eventually. Although I do hope she settles down soon, Marcus mentioned she's been having some financial difficulties. Credit problems, I think. But that's normal for young people these days, isn't it? The seeds were planted. By tomorrow, everyone who mattered would know that Marcus had married a woman who was too embarrassed to meet his family and who had money problems. The second course brought more opportunities. I'm giving them some money to help them get started, I continued. $500,000 from their father's life insurance. I figure if Jessica is going to be part of the family, she should benefit from the family's resources. How generous of you, said Patricia, my lawyer, who was among the dinner guests. I hope they use it wisely. Oh, I'm sure they will. Although I did put some protections in place. You know how impulsive young people can be with money. By dessert, The conversation had moved on to other topics, but the foundation had been laid. When the scandal broke, no one would be surprised. They'd remember this dinner and think, Sandra tried so hard to welcome that girl, but we could all see the red flags. After my guests left, I sat on my own deck overlooking the ocean, a glass of wine in my hand. Tomorrow evening, my son would learn exactly who he had married, and Jessica would learn exactly who she had tried to deceive. But tonight, they were still blissfully unaware, probably making love in my guest bedroom, probably planning how they would spend their newfound wealth. Let them enjoy this last night of ignorance, because tomorrow, their real honeymoon would begin. And it was going to be nothing like what they expected. The calm before the storm, and Sandra is orchestrating this revenge like a master chess player. But we're just getting started. Wait until you see what that special delivery contains. If you're loving Sandra's strategic approach to dealing with betrayal, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to see what real consequences look like. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell because tomorrow's chapter is going to blow your mind. The next day crawled by like torture. I tried to distract myself with normal activities, reading, gardening, answering emails, but my mind kept drifting to the beach house and what was about to unfold there. At 5:30 p.m., I positioned myself at a coffee shop across from the beach house with a clear view of the front door. I ordered a latte I didn't want and pretended to read a book while watching the windows of my own property. At exactly 6 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. David Hawthorne stepped out, carrying a large manila envelope and what appeared to be a substantial folder. He walked to the front door with the confident stride of someone who had done this many times before. I watched through the windows as Marcus answered the door. Jessica appeared beside him, probably curious about the unexpected visitor. David spoke to them briefly, handed over the envelope, and requested signatures on his tablet. The moment they closed the door, David pulled out his phone and texted me. Delivered. Both parties signed for receipt. Contents include full dossier, photographs, financial records, and timeline. Good luck. I stayed in the coffee shop, watching the house. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. The lights stayed on, and I could see movement in the living room. Then the screaming started. Even from across the street, even through the closed windows of the coffee shop, I could hear Jessica's voice rising to a shriek. I saw Marcus appear at the living room window, pacing frantically. Jessica threw something, it looked like a pillow, across the room. The fight lasted for over an hour. I saw Jessica storm out onto the deck, Marcus following her. She was gesturing wildly, pointing back toward the house, then at him. Even at this distance, her body language screamed guilt and desperation. Marcus, my poor son, looked like a man whose world had just collapsed. Because it had. The dossier contained everything. Copies of Jessica's real credit reports showing the massive debt she'd hidden from him. Photographs of her with Brandon Phillips, including some very intimate shots taken at various hotels over the past 6 months. Email printouts showing her conversations with friends about landing the rich boy and playing the long game with the grieving mama's boy. But the most damaging item in that folder wasn't about Jessica at all. It was about the money I'd given them. The account I'd set up for Marcus came with very specific terms and conditions buried in the fine print. Terms that Jessica, in her excitement over the sudden windfall, had encouraged Marcus to ignore when he signed the paperwork. The money could only be accessed for specific purposes: a house down payment, education expenses, starting a legitimate business, or medical emergencies. Any other use would trigger an immediate freeze on the account and an investigation into potential fraud. And according to the bank records in that folder, Jessica had already started spending the money. $15,000 in the past 24 hours alone, on luxury items, designer clothes, and jewelry. All of it completely against the terms of the account. All of it automatically flagged as potential fraud. All of it grounds for not just freezing the account, but for criminal charges. As I watched my son pace frantically in my living room while his new wife screamed at him from the deck, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness. This wasn't the way I'd wanted to teach Marcus this lesson. But he'd left me no choice. Around 8 p.m., I saw Jessica storm back into the house, grab what looked like a suitcase, and head for the door. Marcus followed her, clearly pleading with her to stay. But she got in her car and drove away, leaving my son standing alone in the driveway. I paid for my untouched latte and drove home, where I found 17 missed calls from Marcus. I didn't call him back that night. He needed time to process what he'd learned. Time to understand the full scope of what Jessica had done to him and what he had done to me. But mostly, he needed time to realize that actions have consequences, and some consequences can't be fixed with apologies. The next morning brought the first piece of excellent news. James called from the Los Angeles Times. "Sandra, that story you gave me? It's running in tomorrow's edition. Front page of the lifestyle section. The Instagram influencer who fooled everyone. A story of deception and fraud in Los Angeles high society. Everything verified, I hope? Every single detail. We even found 3 other men she's run similar schemes on. This is going to be huge." The second piece of good news came from my bank. The fraud investigation had been triggered automatically when Jessica exceeded the spending limits on Marcus's account. Not only was the remaining money frozen, but Jessica's purchases were being reviewed for potential criminal prosecution. The third piece of news was the most satisfying of all. Jessica had posted a long, rambling explanation on her Instagram account, trying to get ahead of the story. But instead of taking responsibility, she'd blamed Marcus for not understanding her and me for sabotaging their happiness. The post had been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from outrage to mockery. Her follower count was dropping by the thousands as people realized they'd been following a fraud. By noon, Marcus finally called. "Mom, we need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "How am I feeling? Mom, my marriage is over. My wife is apparently a criminal. Half the money you gave me is frozen pending a fraud investigation. How do you think I'm feeling?" "I think you're feeling like someone who just learned a very expensive lesson about trust." There was a long pause. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what she was doing." "I suspected. I hoped I was wrong." "How long have you known?" "I hired an investigator 6 months ago. I've had that information since then." 6 months. His voice cracked. "You've known for 6 months and you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No," he admitted. "I wouldn't have. I know. That's why I didn't tell you. You had to see it for yourself." "So, you set this whole thing up? The money, the investigation, everything?" "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Marcus. You wanted the keys to my house, so I gave them to you. You wanted money, so I gave you that too. I just made sure you understood the value of both." "By destroying my marriage?" "By revealing the truth about your marriage. There's a difference." I could hear him crying on the other end of the phone, and my heart broke for him. But some lessons can only be learned through pain. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the wedding, about not inviting you, about everything." "I know you are, sweetheart. What do I do now?" "Now you come home. You learn from this. You rebuild your life based on truth instead of lies." "And us? Are we okay?" I looked out at the ocean, thinking about my son standing alone in my driveway last night, finally understanding what he had lost. "We will be," I said. "But it's going to take time. And it's going to require you to prove that you've learned something from this experience." "I have learned something. I've learned that my mother is the only person who's ever really had my back." "Then don't forget that lesson, Marcus. Because I won't teach it twice." The story broke in the Los Angeles Times 3 days later, and it was even more devastating than I had hoped. James had done his research thoroughly, tracing Jessica's schemes back over 5 years and 3 different cities. The headline read, "The Con Artist Next Door: How Jessica Valdez Built a Life of Luxury Through Lies." The article detailed her fake social media presence, her pattern of targeting grieving widowers and their vulnerable sons, and her mounting debt that she'd hidden from every man she deceived. But the most damaging part wasn't what she'd done to Marcus. It was what the investigation had uncovered about her other victims. There was Thomas Harrison, a 60-year-old widower in San Francisco whose son had introduced him to Jessica 2 years ago. She'd convinced Thomas to invest $50,000 in her marketing company before disappearing with the money. There was Michael Chun, whose father had died in a car accident, leaving him with a substantial inheritance. Jessica had dated Michael for 8 months, slowly convincing him to pay her credit card bills and rent while she got back on her feet after a fictional family tragedy. There was David Rodriguez, who'd lost his wife to cancer and was raising 2 young children alone. Jessica had played the perfect stepmother for 6 months while systematically draining his savings account. Each story was more heartbreaking than the last, and each one painted a picture of a woman who saw grief as opportunity and vulnerability as weakness to exploit. The article included Jessica's real name, her aliases, and photographs from her various social media accounts. It detailed her actual financial situation: over $200,000 in debt across 15 different credit cards and 3 student loans for degrees she'd never completed. Most importantly, it included a statement from the LAPD that they were opening a formal investigation into possible fraud and identity theft charges. Jessica Valdez had become a public laughingstock overnight, and more importantly, a wanted woman. Marcus called me after the article hit the internet. "Mom, have you seen the Times?" "I have. She did this to other people, other families." "Yes, she did. And I almost let her do it to us. But you didn't. Because sometimes the people who love us most have to make hard choices to protect us from ourselves." There was a long pause. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Did you plan this whole thing? From the beginning? The wedding gift, the money, the investigation, the newspaper article?" I considered lying, softening the truth to spare his feelings. But Marcus was 28 years old, and it was time he learned to handle difficult truths. "Yes," I said simply. "Why?" "Because you excluded me from the most important day of your life to spare the feelings of a woman who is stealing from you. Because you asked me to hand over my most precious possessions without offering me anything in return. Because you were so blinded by what you thought was love that you couldn't see you were being used. And you thought humiliating me publicly was the best way to teach me that lesson? I thought showing you the truth was the only way to save you from a lifetime of being exploited. But Mom, everyone knows now. Everyone knows I was stupid enough to marry a con artist. Everyone also knows that your mother loved you enough to risk your anger to protect you. Everyone knows that when you needed saving, your family was there for you." I could hear him thinking on the other end of the line. The money I spent, am I going to be in trouble? The money Jessica spent will be investigated. But you personally? You were a victim of fraud. The district attorney isn't interested in prosecuting victims. And Jessica? Jessica is going to face the consequences of her choices. All of them. 6 weeks later, Jessica was arrested at a hotel in Phoenix, where she'd been staying under the fake name Jessica Martinez, one of several aliases she'd used over the years. Her real name was Jessica Valdez. She was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny across multiple jurisdictions. The arrest made the national news, and suddenly everyone wanted to know more about the Instagram con artist who'd fooled so many people for so long. Marcus came home that day, showing up at my door with a single suitcase and tears in his eyes. "Can I stay here for a while?" he asked. "I need to figure out my life." "This is your home," I told him. "It always has been." That evening, we sat on my deck overlooking the ocean, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset. I keep thinking about Dad, Marcus said suddenly. What about him? About how he would have handled this? About what he would have said to me? I thought about my late husband, about his wisdom and his patience, and his unwavering belief that people should face the consequences of their actions. He would have said that you're lucky to have learned this lesson when you're young enough to recover from it. And what would he have said about what you did? I smiled, remembering the man who taught me that protecting the people you love sometimes requires making difficult choices. He would have said that I did exactly what a mother should do, that I put your long-term well-being above your short-term happiness. Even though it hurt? Especially because it hurt. Pain is how we learn, Marcus. Comfort is how we stay ignorant. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Mom, yes, thank you for saving me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Thank you for coming home. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize where home actually was. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You're here now. That's what matters. Justice is being served, but Sandra's story is far from over. Can you believe how perfectly she orchestrated this entire plan? If you're loving watching a master manipulator get outplayed by someone even smarter, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. We're not done yet. There are still consequences to face and lessons to learn. Make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter shows what happens when the dust finally settles. 6 months after Jessica's arrest, Marcus was a different man. He'd moved back into my guest house, gotten a job at a respected financial planning firm, and started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional manipulation he'd endured. But more importantly, he'd begun to understand the deeper lesson I'd been trying to teach him. That relationships are built on respect, not just love. I think I'm ready to start dating again, he told me over breakfast one Saturday morning. I nearly choked on my coffee. Are you sure? I think so. But I want to do it differently this time. How so? I want you to meet her. Early on. I want your opinion to matter. I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son, really looked at him. The naive boy who'd fallen for Jessica's act was gone, replaced by a man who understood that wisdom often comes from people who love you enough to tell you difficult truths. I'd like that very much. And I want to take it slow. Really slow. No moving in together, no shared finances, no big declarations until I'm absolutely sure I know who she really is. That sounds very wise. I learned from the best teacher. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened the door with curiosity rather than concern. A young woman stood on my doorstep, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers. Mrs. Gray? My name is Amanda Stevens. I was wondering if I could speak with you for a few minutes. What about Jessica Valdez? Or Jessica Martinez, as she called herself when she was with your son. My blood ran cold. Are you a reporter?
No, ma'am.
I'm one of her victims. I invited Amanda in and made her tea while she told me her story. Her father had died 3 years ago, leaving her and her brother with a modest inheritance and a small family business. Jessica had targeted her brother, convincing him to invest their inheritance in her fake marketing company. She took everything, Amanda said, tears in her eyes. Our father's life savings, the money for my daughter's college fund, even the down payment we'd saved for expanding the business. I'm so sorry, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to thank you. Thank me? If you hadn't exposed her, she would have kept doing this to other families. My brother and I, we lost our money, but we got something more valuable. We learned the truth before she could do even more damage. Marcus had joined us in the living room and was listening intently. How much did she take from you? He asked quietly.
$82.
Everything we had. I watched my son's face as he processed this information. The guilt and shame were written clearly across his features. I'm starting a victim support group, Amanda continued, for people who were taken in by Jessica and others like her. We're working with the FBI to help with the prosecution, and we're trying to help each other rebuild. That sounds like important work, I said. It is. And Mrs. Gray, I wanted to ask you something. Would you consider speaking to our group? About how you figured out what she was doing? About how you protected your family? I looked at Marcus, who was staring at his hands. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. You are, Marcus said suddenly. Mom, you saved not just me, but all the people she would have hurt after me. You should tell that story. Would you come with me? I asked him.
Yes.
I think I need to tell my story, too, about how easy it was to be fooled and what the warning signs were that I ignored. Amanda's face lit up. That would be incredible. Hearing from both perspectives, the protector and the protected. It could help so many people. A month later, Marcus and I stood in front of a room full of people who had been victimized by various con artists. Some were elderly, some young, some wealthy, some middle class. But they all shared the same expression, the haunted look of people who had been betrayed by someone they trusted. I told them about recognizing the red flags, about trusting your instincts even when it might hurt someone you love. Marcus talked about the psychology of manipulation, about how skilled predators find your vulnerabilities and exploit them. But the most powerful moment came when a woman in the back row raised her hand. Mrs. Gray, how did you find the strength to risk your relationship with your son to save him? I thought about that question for a long moment, because I realized that protecting someone sometimes means protecting them from themselves. And because I learned that enabling someone's bad choices isn't love, it's fear. Fear of what? Fear of them being angry with you. Fear of them pulling away. Fear of conflict. But real love, mature love, is willing to risk temporary anger to prevent permanent damage. After the meeting, we were approached by several people who wanted to share their own stories. A father whose daughter had been scammed by a fake charity. A woman whose elderly mother had given away her life savings to a romance scammer. A man whose son had fallen for a pyramid scheme. Each story reinforced the same lesson, that good intentions aren't enough to protect the people you love. Sometimes protection requires action, even when that action feels cruel. Driving home that night, Marcus was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? I asked. About how many people Jessica hurt. About how I was going to be part of that if you hadn't stopped me. But I did stop you. That's what matters. I keep wondering what would have happened if I'd actually married her in a real ceremony. If I'd brought her into the family officially before you figured out what she was doing. I'd wondered the same thing many times. She would have taken everything, I said honestly. The house, the money, the business relationships. She would have isolated you from everyone who could have helped you see the truth. And by the time I figured it out, it would have been too late. Probably. Mom, can I ask you something else? Anything. If this situation happened again, if I brought home someone you suspected was wrong for me, would you handle it the same way? I considered this carefully. I hope I wouldn't need to. I hope you've learned to recognize the warning signs yourself. But if I hadn't, then yes, I would protect you again, even if it meant risking our relationship. Good, he said, surprising me. I want you to promise me that. Promise you what? Promise me that you'll never let politeness or fear of hurting my feelings stop you from protecting our family. Promise me that you'll always choose truth over comfort. I pulled into our driveway and turned to look at my son, this man who had finally learned the difference between being loved and being enabled. I promise. And I promise you something too. What's that? I promise that I'll never again mistake your protection for interference. I promise that I'll listen when you're trying to warn me about something, even if I don't want to hear it. Those are good promises. They're important promises. Because, Mom, what you did, it saved my life. Maybe not literally, but you saved the life I actually want to live. That night, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, thinking about the conversation. Marcus was right. I had saved his life. Not from physical danger, but from a future built on lies and manipulation. Jessica was in prison, facing multiple felony charges across 3 states. Her victims were slowly recovering, some with the help of restitution, others simply with the knowledge that justice was being served. Marcus was building a new life based on honesty and self-awareness. He was dating again, but carefully, and he'd brought his new girlfriend to meet me after only 3 dates. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Jessica wasn't. Genuine, self-sufficient, kind to service workers, and genuinely interested in getting to know Marcus's family. Most importantly, when I asked her direct questions about her life, her work, and her intentions, she answered them honestly and without defensiveness. I like her, I told Marcus after Sarah left from our first dinner together. Why? Because she's not trying to impress me. She's not performing. She's just being herself. That's what I thought too. And because when I asked her about her financial situation, she didn't get offended or defensive. She just told me the truth. Which is that she has student loans, a modest savings account, and a job she loves that pays her enough to be independent. No debt, no secrets, no grand stories about her tragic past or her brilliant future. Boring financial stability, Marcus said with a grin. The sexiest kind. 6 months later, Marcus proposed to Sarah in my garden, with my blessing and my engagement ring. The one his father had given me 30 years ago. But this time, I was invited to the wedding planning from the very beginning. Sarah actually asked my opinion on venues, flowers, and music. She wanted to know about family traditions and whether there were any special elements Marcus and I thought should be included. The wedding was beautiful, held in my garden with 100 guests who actually mattered to both of them. Sarah wore my wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly. Marcus cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. And when they exchanged vows, speaking words they'd written themselves about building a life based on honesty and trust, I knew that the hard lesson I'd taught Marcus had been worth every difficult moment. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. A year after Jessica's arrest, her trial finally began. The prosecution had built an airtight case, with testimony from 7 different victims across 4 states and evidence of over $300,000 in fraudulent activity. I was called as a witness, not as a victim, but as someone who had documented Jessica's pattern of behavior. The prosecutor wanted me to walk the jury through how I'd identified the red flags and gathered the evidence that exposed her schemes. Mrs. Gray, the prosecutor asked me on the stand, what first made you suspicious of the defendant's relationship with your son? It was her behavior at family gatherings, I replied. She was always performing, always on. She told elaborate stories about her background that changed slightly each time she told them. Can you give the jury an example? She claimed to be an orphan who'd grown up in foster care. But one time she mentioned her grandmother's recipe, and another time she talked about her father's business. When I asked about these inconsistencies, she became angry and accused me of not being supportive. What did you do with these suspicions? I hired a private investigator to verify her background. Everything she told us was false. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a controlling mother who'd sabotaged my son's happiness out of jealousy. But the evidence was overwhelming, and my testimony was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Marcus also testified, describing how Jessica had gradually isolated him from friends and family, how she'd encouraged him to make financial decisions without consulting anyone else, and how she'd reacted with rage whenever he questioned her stories. Did you love the defendant? The the prosecutor asked him. "I thought I did," Marcus replied. "But I realize now that I was in love with the character she was playing, not with who she really was." "How do you feel about your mother's intervention now?" "Grateful. Completely grateful. If she hadn't exposed the truth, I would have lost everything. My family, my financial security, my ability to trust my own judgment." The most devastating testimony came from Jessica's other victims. Amanda Stevens described how Jessica had befriended her grieving brother, attending their father's funeral and offering comfort during their darkest moments, only to systematically steal their inheritance. Michael Chen's testimony was particularly heartbreaking. He described how Jessica had played the perfect girlfriend for 8 months, cooking his favorite meals, caring for him when he was sick, even helping him choose a headstone for his father's grave, all while draining his bank account. "She knew exactly how to make me feel loved," he said, tears streaming down his face. "And she used that knowledge to destroy me financially and emotionally." By the time the prosecution rested their case, Jessica's defense was in shambles. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was a victim herself, a troubled young woman who'd made poor choices but hadn't intended to cause harm.
The jury didn't buy it.
After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts: multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. At sentencing, each of her victims was allowed to make a statement. "I wasn't technically a victim, but the judge allowed me to speak about the impact her crimes had on my family." "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at Jessica for the first time since the trial began, "the defendant didn't just steal money from these families. She stole their ability to trust, their faith in their own judgment, their belief that love and kindness will be reciprocated." Jessica stared back at me with undisguised hatred. "My son will recover from this experience," I continued, "because he has a support system and the resources to rebuild. But some of her victims may never fully trust again. Some may never be able to afford to retire because of what she took from them." The defendant's crimes ripple outward, affecting not just her direct victims, but their children, their grandchildren, their future relationships. When all the victim statements had been read, the judge sentenced Jessica to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 10 years. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims, though we all knew that money would likely never be recovered. As the bailiff led Jessica away in handcuffs, she turned back toward the gallery where Marcus and I were sitting. "This is all your fault," she screamed at me. "You ruined everything. You destroyed my life." "No," I said quietly, knowing she could hear me. "You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy anyone else's." Outside the courthouse, we were approached by several reporters wanting comments about the case. Most of the victims declined to speak, but Marcus surprised me by agreeing to a brief interview. "What would you want other people to learn from your experience?" the reporter asked him. "That if someone who loves you is trying to warn you about a relationship, you should listen," Marcus replied. "Even if you don't want to hear it. Even if it makes you angry. The people who truly care about you aren't trying to control your happiness. They're trying to protect your future." "And what would you say to other families dealing with similar situations?" "That sometimes love means being willing to be the bad guy. My mother risked our relationship to save me from making a terrible mistake, and I'm grateful every day that she had the courage to do what needed to be done." That evening, we had dinner at my house, Marcus, Sarah, and me. Sarah had been incredibly supportive throughout the trial, understanding that this wasn't just about justice for Jessica's crimes, but about healing for everyone she'd hurt. "I have something to tell you both," Marcus said over dessert. Sarah smiled and took his hand. "We have something to tell you. You're pregnant," I said immediately. They both stared at me in shock. "How did you know?" Sarah asked. "Because you've been glowing for weeks, and you ordered sparkling cider instead of wine." We wanted to wait until after the trial to tell you, Marcus said. We didn't want to overshadow everything that was happening. I felt tears spring to my eyes. A grandchild. Your first grandchild, Sarah corrected gently. And we were hoping. We wanted to ask if you'd consider being in the delivery room with us. You want me there? You're going to be this baby's grandmother, Marcus said. Of course we want you there. I thought about Jessica, who would have undoubtedly tried to exclude me from major family moments, who would have seen my involvement as interference rather than love.
I would be honored, I said.
That night, after they left, I sat in my study looking at the newspaper coverage of Jessica's sentencing. Con artist gets 12 years in scheme that targeted grieving families, read the headline. Justice had been served, but more importantly, my family had been protected. My son had learned to value truth over comfort, to listen to wisdom even when it was unwelcome, and to choose partners based on character rather than chemistry. And soon, there would be a new generation, a grandchild who would grow up in a family that valued honesty, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Jessica had tried to destroy our family from within, using love as a weapon and trust as a tool for manipulation. Instead, she taught us all a valuable lesson about the difference between love that enables and love that protects. And in the end, protection had won. Justice served. 12 years in prison for Jessica, and Marcus finally understands the incredible gift his mother gave him. But wait, there's more to this story, and the next chapter is going to show you just how completely Sandra's life transformed after this experience. If you're loving this tale of family loyalty and justice, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see what real consequences look like. 2 years after Jessica's sentencing, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The victim support group that Amanda Stevens had started had grown into a nonprofit organization, and I'd become one of their primary speakers and advisors. We called it Truth Shield, a support network for families who had been targeted by con artists and, more importantly, an educational program to help people recognize and avoid manipulation tactics. I traveled across the country, speaking to community groups, law enforcement agencies, and university students about the psychology of deception and the importance of protecting your loved ones even when it's uncomfortable. But the most meaningful part of my new life was happening right at home. Marcus and Sarah's daughter, Elena, was now 2.5 years old and absolutely the light of my life. She had Marcus's dark eyes and Sarah's gentle spirit, and she called me Nana, the first word she'd learned to say clearly. Nana, she squealed as I walked into their house for our weekly Sunday dinner. Nana here. Hello, my beautiful girl, I said, scooping her up and spinning her around. Have you been good for Mommy and Daddy? She's been perfect, Sarah said, kissing my cheek. As always. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron that read, World's Best Dad, a Mother's Day gift from Sarah. Mom. Perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready. These Sunday dinners had become sacred to all of us. No phones, no distractions, just family time filled with laughter and conversation about everything and nothing. During dinner, Marcus shared news from his work. He'd been promoted to senior financial advisor and was now specializing in helping fraud victims rebuild their financial lives. I had a client this week who reminded me so much of myself 3 years ago, he said. Young guy, completely blinded by what he thought was love, about to make terrible financial decisions for a woman who was obviously using him. What did you do? I asked. I told him my story. All of it. The secret wedding, the con artist wife, the mother who saved me from myself. How did he react? First he got angry. Then he got defensive. Then he went home and really looked at his relationship with clear eyes. And he broke up with her. Found out later she'd been seeing 2 other men at the same time, and all 3 of them had been supporting her financially. Another family saved, Sarah said with satisfaction. Speaking of saving families, Marcus said, looking at me meaningfully. I have some news. Good news, I hope? The best news. Sarah and I are pregnant again. I nearly dropped my fork. Again? Already? Elena's going to be a big sister, Sarah said, beaming. We're due in October. Twins, Marcus added casually. Twins. I shrieked, causing Elena to giggle from her high chair. Twin boys, Sarah confirmed. We found out yesterday. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed with joy. 3 grandchildren. 3 beautiful souls who would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally, but also held accountable for their choices. Have you thought about names? Actually, we wanted to ask you about that, Marcus said. We were thinking about naming one of them after Dad. I felt tears spring to my eyes. He would have loved that. David Samuel Gray, Sarah said. And we were thinking about Thomas Marcus Gray for the other one. Thomas? After my father? We want our children to know their family history, Marcus explained. To understand where they come from and what values they're expected to uphold. After dinner, while Sarah put Elena down for her nap, Marcus and I sat on their deck overlooking the canyon. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? The way you handled the Jessica situation. I thought about this question, which I'd asked myself many times over the past 3 years. I regret that it was necessary. I said finally. I regret that you were hurt. I regret that other families were hurt. But do I regret stopping her? Never. Even though it was manipulative? Even though I felt betrayed when I found out you'd orchestrated the whole thing? Marcus, there's a difference between manipulation for selfish purposes and strategic action for protective purposes. Jessica manipulated you to steal from you. I strategized to save you. But the result was the same. People doing things they didn't know they were being guided to do. The motivation matters. Jessica's motivation was greed. Mine was love. And the outcome matters too, Marcus added. Jessica's manipulations would have destroyed lives. Yours saved them. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I got a letter last week, Marcus said suddenly. From whom? Jessica. My blood ran cold. She wrote to you from prison?
Yes.
She's apparently eligible for parole review in 7 years, and she wanted to apologize. What did the letter say? That she was sorry for deceiving me. That she'd been in a dark place in her life and had made terrible choices. That she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she'd found God in prison and was a changed person. I felt a familiar protective instinct rise in my chest. How did that make you feel? Angry, mostly, because even her apology was manipulative. She spent 3 paragraphs talking about her suffering in prison, her difficult childhood, her mental health struggles. It was all about her, even when she was supposedly apologizing to me. Did you respond? I wrote a letter back. Want to hear it? Very much. Marcus pulled out his phone and read from his notes. Jessica, I received your letter. I'm glad you're using your time in prison for reflection and personal growth. However, I want to be clear about something. My forgiveness is not required for your healing, and your apology is not required for mine. I forgave you years ago, not for your benefit, but for my own peace of mind. I also want you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting. You made choices that hurt multiple families, and the consequences of those choices are permanent. I hope you truly have changed, and I hope you use the rest of your life to make amends through your actions, not your words. But I will not be part of that process. Please do not contact me or my family again. I stared at my son with amazement and pride. That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. You think so? I think it shows that you've learned the most important lesson of all, which is that you can forgive someone without trusting them, that you can wish someone well without welcoming them back into your life, That protecting yourself and your family is not cruel, it's necessary. I learned from the best teacher. That evening, as I drove home to my own house, I reflected on how much our family had changed since that terrible phone call 4 years ago. Marcus had grown from a naive young man into a wise father and husband. Our relationship had evolved from enabler and enabled to true partnership based on mutual respect. Most importantly, we'd all learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just fear dressed up as devotion. Jessica was still in prison, still trying to manipulate people even from behind bars. But her power over our family was completely broken, and it would never be restored. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. A young woman got out and approached me nervously. "Mrs. Gray, I'm sorry to bother you at home. My name is Lisa Parker. I heard you speak at a conference last month about recognizing relationship red flags." "Of course. How can I help you?" "I think my sister is involved with someone who might be, well, someone like Jessica. I've been trying to warn her, but she won't listen to me. She thinks I'm just jealous of her happiness." I looked at this young woman, seeing myself 4 years ago, someone who loved a family member enough to risk their anger to protect them. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" I asked. "I think I can help you." As we walked toward my house, I thought about how Jessica's attempt to destroy our family had ultimately made us stronger, wiser, and more committed to protecting each other. Evil had tried to win, but love, real love, tough love, protective love, had triumphed. And it would keep triumphing, one family at a time. 6 years after Jessica's sentencing, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle in the most unexpected way. "Mrs. Gray, this is Detective Maria Rodriguez with the Los Angeles Police Department. I'm calling about Jessica Valdez." My heart skipped a beat. "What about her?" "We wanted to inform you that she was found guilty of additional charges filed against her while in prison. She was caught running a commissary scam and attempting to manipulate other inmates' families for money through fraudulent letters." "So, her sentence was extended?" "Yes, ma'am. She received an additional 5 years. She won't be eligible for any kind of release for at least 12 more years. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. Even in prison, Jessica couldn't stop being exactly who she was, a predator who saw every relationship as an opportunity for exploitation. That evening, I shared the news with Marcus and Sarah over dinner. The twins, David and Thomas, were now 5 years old and fascinated by everything, while 7-year-old Elena helped me set the table with serious concentration. "What do you think?" I asked Marcus after explaining the detective's call. "I think it's good news," he said immediately. "She's exactly where she belongs, and now she'll stay there even longer." "I agree," Sarah said. "And I think it shows that people like Jessica never really change. They just get better at hiding what they're doing." "You think we should tell the kids when they're older?" Marcus asked me. "I think we should tell them age-appropriate versions of the truth. That there are people in the world who try to hurt families, but that we're strong enough to protect each other." "That sounds right," Marcus said. "And I want them to know that sometimes the people who love you most have to make hard decisions to keep you safe." The next week, I attended a victim support group meeting where Amanda Stevens shared the news about Jessica's extended sentence. She tried to run the same schemes on other inmates' families, Amanda told the group. Letters claiming she needed money for legal fees, fake stories about medical emergencies. Even in prison, she couldn't stop being a predator. The group members shook their heads in disgust, but I also saw something else in their faces: validation. Every doubt they'd ever had about whether Jessica truly deserved her punishment had been erased. "It makes me feel better about everything we went through," said Michael Chen. "Knowing that we weren't wrong about her character. Knowing that our families are safer with her locked up." After the meeting, Amanda approached me. Mrs. Gray, I wanted to thank you again for trusting your instincts and acting on them. If you hadn't exposed her when you did, who knows how many more families she would have destroyed. We all played a part in stopping her, I said. You, Michael, all the other victims who were brave enough to testify. But you were the one who chose to fight instead of just hoping for the best. You were the one who risked your relationship with your son to protect him. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my perspective had changed since that first devastating phone call from Marcus. The woman who had received that call would have been devastated by the idea of conflict with her son. This woman understood that conflict was sometimes necessary to prevent catastrophe. That evening, Marcus tucked the children into bed while Sarah and I cleaned up from dinner. "How do you feel about seeing her again?" Sarah asked. "Satisfied," I said honestly. She looked exactly like what she is, a pathetic criminal trying to manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. "Do you think she'll try to contact us again?" "Probably. But it doesn't matter. We know who she is now, and we know who we are. She can't hurt us anymore." Marcus joined us in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around both of us. "The kids want to know if Aunt Jessica is the bad lady from the stories you tell them." I laughed. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that Aunt Jessica isn't really their aunt, and that sometimes people pretend to be good when they're actually not good. But I also told them that Nana is very smart about recognizing pretend good people." "And what did they say?" "Elena said that Nana is the smartest person in the world, and the twins said they want to be smart like Nana when they grow up." "Smart like Nana," I repeated, feeling my heart swell with pride. "The smartest person in the world," Sarah added with a smile. As I drove home that night, I thought about the young woman I'd been 5 years ago. Wealthy but lonely, loving but enabling, protective but passive. That woman had been destroyed by a single phone call from her ungrateful son. But from her ashes had risen someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might threaten her family. Jessica Valdez had tried to be the villain in our story. Instead, she'd turned me into the hero. And I was just getting started. Can you believe Jessica tried to con them one more time, even from prison? But Sandra saw right through it and shut her down completely. This is what happens when you underestimate a woman who's learned her worth. We're in the final chapter now, and you won't believe how perfectly Sandra's story concludes. Hit that like button if you're loving this ultimate revenge tale, and make sure you're subscribed because our final chapter is going to leave you speechless. 10 years had passed since that devastating phone call from Marcus, and as I sat in my study writing my memoirs, I marveled at how completely my life had transformed. The manuscript before me was titled "The Mother's Guide to Protective Love, When Saying No Saves Everything." My publisher assured me it would become a bestseller, joining the ranks of books that help families navigate the complex world of manipulation and abuse. But the real measure of my success wasn't in book sales or speaking engagements. It was in the family portrait hanging on my wall. Marcus, Sarah, and their 4 children, yes, 4, surprise baby Emma had arrived 2 years ago, all gathered around me at last year's Christmas dinner. Elena was now 13, smart and confident, already showing signs of the protective instincts I'd taught her to value. The twins, David and Thomas, were 11-year-old whirlwinds who asked thoughtful questions about family loyalty and personal responsibility. And little Emma, at 5 years old, already had the same sharp eyes that had served me so well in recognizing deception. Marcus had become one of the most respected fraud prevention specialists on the West Coast, consulting with law enforcement agencies and financial institutions to help them identify and stop romance scams and family manipulation schemes. Sarah had started her own nonprofit organization called Second Chance Families, which provided counseling and support to relatives of con artist victims, the siblings, parents, and children who were also traumatized by their loved one's deception. Together, they were raising their children with a perfect balance of unconditional love and clear boundaries, the combination that creates strong, independent adults who can both give and receive healthy relationships. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the letter I'd received just last month from Detective Rodriguez. Jessica Valdez was still serving her extended sentence and had been moved to a maximum security facility after her commissary fraud conviction. She would likely spend the next 12 years behind bars, with no possibility of early release. She never learned, Marcus had said when I showed him the news article about her extended sentence. She kept thinking she could outsmart everyone, even in prison. People like Jessica don't learn, I'd replied. They just get more desperate and more obvious. Now, as I put the finishing touches on my final chapter, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned and the legacy I hoped to leave. The first lesson was that protecting someone you love sometimes requires risking their temporary anger to prevent their permanent destruction. I had risked my relationship with Marcus to save him from a lifetime of exploitation, and that risk had ultimately strengthened our bond beyond anything I could have imagined. The second lesson was that manipulation thrives in secrecy and dies in sunlight. Jessica's power had come from keeping her victims isolated and ashamed. But once her actions were exposed publicly, once her victims connected with each other, her ability to cause harm evaporated. The third lesson was that enabling someone's bad choices isn't love, it's fear. For years, I had confused supporting Marcus with protecting him from consequences. Real love required me to let him face the natural results of his decisions, even when those results were painful. The fourth lesson was that sometimes the people who appear to need rescuing are actually the ones doing the drowning. Jessica had presented herself as a victim of circumstances, but she was actually a predator who used other people's compassion against them. And the final lesson was that strength isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about choosing which conflicts are worth having. I had spent years avoiding confrontation with Marcus about his poor choices. But when I finally chose to fight for his future instead of his temporary comfort, everything changed. My phone rang, interrupting my writing. The caller ID showed Marcus's number.
Hi, sweetheart.
How was your day? Incredible, Mom. I just got off the phone with the FBI. They want me to head up a new task force on family fraud prevention. That's wonderful. It means travel, speaking engagements, training law enforcement across the country. But Mom, here's the best part. They want you to co-chair it with me. I set down my pen and stared out the window at the ocean. They want both of us? They want the mother-son team that stopped one of the most successful con artists in California history. They want the people who turned a family crisis into a national education campaign. What would it involve? 6 months a year traveling to speak at conferences, train investigators, consult on cases. The other 6 months we'd work from home, developing curricula and writing policy recommendations. I thought about this opportunity. The chance to take everything I'd learned and use it to protect families across the country. Would Sarah and the children be able to travel with us sometimes? That's the beauty of it, Mom. They want this to be a family-friendly program. Sarah would be a consultant on supporting the relatives of fraud victims, and the kids would be part of our presentations about how to raise children who can recognize manipulation. We'd all work together?
The whole family, Mom.
Teaching other families how to protect each other the way we learned to protect each other. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Jessica tried to destroy our family, and instead she created a dynasty of people dedicated to stopping others like her. When do they want an answer? Next month. But Mom, I already know what my answer is. I want to do this. The question is, do you? I looked at the manuscript on my desk, then at the family photo on my wall, then out at the endless ocean that had witnessed both my darkest moment and my greatest triumph. Yes, I said. Let's do this together. After we hung up, I added one final paragraph to my book. 10 years ago, I thought my story was about a mother saving her son from a con artist. I was wrong. My story was about a family learning to save each other and then using that knowledge to save others. Jessica Valdez tried to write herself into our story as the villain who destroyed us. Instead, she became the catalyst who transformed us into heroes. To every parent reading this who suspects their child is being manipulated, trust your instincts. To every child who thinks their parents are being overprotective, listen to their concerns. To every family member who sees danger that others can't see, speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. Protection without action isn't protection at all. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because pain teaches us lessons that comfort never can. And some lessons can save not just one life, but generations of lives to come. My name is Sandra Gray, and this is my story of how saying no to my son's disrespect saved yes to our family's future. May it help you write a better ending to your own story. I closed the laptop and walked out to my deck, where the sunset was painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, I would start a new chapter of my life, working alongside my son to protect families across the country. Jessica Valdez was still serving her 20-year extended sentence in federal prison. Marcus was happily married with 4 beautiful children. I was a best-selling author and nationally recognized expert on family protection. And somewhere out there, families were safer because of the lessons we'd learned from our darkest moment. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything your enemy tried to prevent you from being. Jessica had tried to make me a victim. Instead, she'd made me unstoppable. And there you have it, Sandra's incredible transformation from victim to victor, from enabler to empower. She didn't just get revenge on Jessica. She built an entire legacy dedicated to protecting families from predators like her. If this story inspired you to set better boundaries in your own life, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, protecting the people you love sometimes means protecting them from themselves. Sandra's willingness to risk temporary anger to prevent permanent damage saved not just her son, but countless other families who learned from their story. Don't forget to check out our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, in the description below. It's filled with practical steps to help you rebuild your life and relationships on your own terms. And if you love Sandra's story, we have hundreds more just like it. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Next week, we're sharing the story of a woman who discovered her husband's secret family at their 25th anniversary party, and what she did next will leave you speechless. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Her True Stories. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your boundaries matter, and you have the power to write a better ending no matter how dark your beginning was. Keep fighting for the life you deserve, and I'll see you in the next one.